Hi, everyone. Welcome to Morning Matcha. Today's guest is Katie Dalebout. She's an author, a podcaster, and just all around amazing human. We love her. She writes a monthly column on the Fullest website. And she also has a book called Let It Out, which is all about journaling, and you can find it at Barnes & Noble. Hi.
Or everywhere where they have the books.
Yeah. It's
libraries.
Barnes & Noble and everywhere else too.
Yeah, but shout out to in-person bookstores.
Yeah, go to Barnes & Noble and get the Fullest magazine and Katie's book.
Get yourself a saffron latte and just read.
Exactly, because we'll be there soon.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's so nice to be here with you today.
So nice to be here with you. We've had a lot of chatting before this, and I'm glad we get to keep chatting for an hour.
I know. It's so funny because obviously you have your own podcast, so you know what it's like. But whenever, I don't know what you do before you interview people, but I'm always like, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to know anything because I want everything recorded.
Yeah.
And there are just so many juicy things that I think people will still miss out on because we'll go over it and we'll forget. But that's also the fun of having a podcast. And I want to talk to you about that because you also support people in starting their own podcast, which I think is so wonderful. Thanks. And that when you launched that, what's it called? Let your podcast out?
Yeah, let a podcast out.
Yeah, it's so cool. And when you launched that, I thought that was so cool because it's simple, but it doesn't seem simple. It seems really overwhelming when you feel like you have something to say, but you don't have the support system to get you to start it. But you meet so many incredible people. Yeah. And I was just thinking about how much my life has changed since starting one.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, did you start with your podcast?
No. So, just to pick up on what you said, I say this in the course, but I always say that I think podcasting is the new networking. Yeah. If you want to meet people and have a conversation with them and get an hour of their time, start a podcast because it's a relatively low ask. You're asking for someone's time. You know, I don't have to prepare anything when I'm doing a podcast. You just have to show up and, ultimately you're doing them a favor. And I think in mentoring and in networking, that's what you want. Yeah. That two-sided relationship, not just a take. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I started, I don't know if you know this, but I had a blog called The Wellness Wonderland that I started in college. That was, this is the height of blogging. Yeah. So I graduated in 2012. So I started doing this through college.
We're the same age then.
Yeah. And it was great. It was, I had my college job was renting, what we're around right now, video equipment. I studied journalism. So I worked in the journalism building, renting out video equipment to the students. So essentially it was technically I was supposed to answer questions on the equipment, but I was the only girl that worked there and I didn't know how to work the equipment. Yeah. So they just let me, basically I got paid to work on my computer and read blogs. So eventually my boyfriend at the time was like, you should do that. And I was like, I don't know. And he was like, he happened to be a graphic designer. So he built me a website and then I had a blog.
So cool.
And then 2 years later, or maybe just a year later, because I started my podcast in 2013, which is pre-Serial, before people really knew what podcasts were. And, I've been doing it for 7 years now, which is amazing, crazy. But at the time, it was really the same thing. I had moved away from the town I grew up in, and I was really lonely. Is that
where you went to school?
Yeah. So I went to school, and I grew up in a college town. My grandfather coached basketball, so I went to school in the same place that I grew up, which was really hard for me. All I wanted to do was move to New York. I didn't know how to do it. And I didn't have any, our friend Lacey's terms expanders. I didn't know that was possible for me. And so I started this podcast was really a way to meet essentially role models and people I wanted to learn more about and talk to. And so the same thing sort of happened. I had that same boyfriend and I was listening to a lot of podcasts. I was an early adopter because like we were saying before we were recording, I don't have a TV. I was living by myself. I didn't have very many friends. Mm-hmm. So listening to podcasts NPR and, Fresh Air and This American Life. And I was like, I could do that. As if it was easy.
I love that. What's your sign?
Taurus.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know that much about Taurus. I just know they're stable, but I thought maybe I had to do with that because you're like, I can do it. I'll take it on. I'll figure it out.
But I'm also someone who's like you said with the course, like if I can't find the remote, I just won't watch TV. Or like if I can't, like if it gets too much, I'm like, I'm done.
Yeah.
So that's why I made eventually, since I've been doing this for so long, I'm sure I actually know for a fact that you get questions all the time of like, how do you start a magazine?
Yeah.
But I got so many questions of, how do you start a podcast? Like what microphone do you use, this and that? And I got so sick of writing the email over and over and over again that I made like a form Google Doc that I would like send people.
That's so
and it was happening so much of like friends of friends of friends that I was like, I feel like maybe I could like make
monetize
something.
Yeah.
And but I'd never sold anything before because my book, like, the publisher does that. I don't do any. So I was like, it has to be really, really good. So I took months and I made this like 8-module course on everything from concept and developing it and getting it on iTunes to interviewing, which is my favorite part, and then the technology and getting it up on iTunes. And I was like, well, that's not good enough. And so then I interviewed over a dozen other podcasters and producers and other people and how they do it. And then I made a contest element. So then everyone who makes a podcast through the course can submit to me a clip or a full episode. And then I choose one of them to air on the Let It Out podcast. So I feel like it incentivizes people to actually use it because I've done so many courses and things that I've just done half of it and left it.
Yeah.
So anyway.
But I like totally made you get sidetracked. I want to go back to your story about moving to New York.
Yeah. Well, that was somewhat recent. Like I've only been there for just over 2 years.
Wow.
So I moved to Detroit and that's where I was living. And I worked full time in marketing until just last September. So,
oh my gosh. So you had your podcast this whole time?
Yeah, I had a podcast. I wrote a book. I got a book deal. I did all of this alongside having a full-time job.
That's amazing.
And I'm someone that, like I self-funded and self-started, and it was just the way I had to, it was like a means to an end, you know? And somebody said to me the other day, they were like, you're a really hard worker. And I was just like, I'm just living. Like, it's like, I don't know. Having that job was, I didn't have to put the pressure on my full-time work to make money because I was supporting myself through this other way. And it wasn't my dream job. It wasn't what I always wanted to do, but I got pretty good at it, that it could be easy and I could be flexible with it. So I could put my energy towards this other thing. But then ultimately, and we can talk about this too, last year, I just really experienced burnout for the first time. And I was just like, doing too much, spread so thin. It wasn't good for my relationships. And New York is already a lot for the nervous system. But anyway, to answer your question, 2 years ago, I just asked my full-time job. They were based in Manhattan, so I was going back and forth quite a lot, a couple times a month. And then I was just like, could I move here? And if you don't ask, you'll never get a yes or no. So I was so nervous, but they were like, okay, sure. And so I did it. And that was, that brought its own a lot of learning and a lot of growth, because I think that city, as you know, someone said this on my podcast once, it's a town of extremes. So your highs are really high and your lows are ultimately very low. And
That's a really good way of putting it.
I'm kind of that as a person, I feel things way up here and then way down here. And I'm always kind of trying to get here.
What about moving there? Like, what were your expectations and how has it been? Because I think I always want to move to New York. I mean, that's just not in my cards. And I know my family's here and we're super close and Persian family, and like being far from them would be so difficult that I will always feel torn.
Yeah.
But it's always something like that just seems greener on the other side. I've done it in LA. Like I think just a move to LA is probably the smart thing for me, but I don't know. I'm just curious what.
And it's funny because I feel that way about LA now too.
Yeah.
It's like, I think grass is always greener and moving is always so alluring. And I've been thinking about this a lot and changes that have been happening in my life. Like even traveling, it's like I went to Paris for the first time basically by myself this year. And
I saw that. Yeah. And I followed you the whole way.
Yes. And I saw the fullest there. And it made me feel at home and cozy. But it was funny because it's like that cheesy quote that's like probably on a t-shirt or like on a stupid Instagram meme, but like wherever you go, there you are, Like I went to Paris and was like, here I'll feel okay.
Yeah.
If I move to LA, then everything will be great. If you move to New York, and it's
Yeah,
like wherever you go,
exactly.
there you are. But for a minute, you get that hit of dopamine of like, this is new, this is different. So of course, 2 years ago when I got there and I did this thing that like as a kid, I thought would make all of my problems great.
Yeah.
You get a hit of it. It's a drug, newness. I think as humans, we all want novelty. Like that's what we're searching for. And then I got that. And then, it was like, but now I need the next thing. I need the next thing. And that's just being a person.
Yeah, it really is. I love that. I love the way that you shared that too, because I was recently in London. I was like, oh my gosh, actually, it's not New York that I want to live in. It's London that I want to live in. And I just want to live here at least like 3-4 times a year. And you just like go through these things. And especially in our line of work, I mean, there's so many people we could connect with and then expand and go from there. But ultimately, it really comes back to like, why are we doing all this to begin with? And I think it's so that we can work on ourselves and be more involved in the world, but not get caught up in like, I need to be it. I mean, what's so beautiful about our generation is that we can literally connect with people all over the world and not have to be there.
Yeah.
And that's also more eco-friendly. Like bringing in all this technology isn't good for the world in terms of like all the e-waste that we experience. But like, what about it is good is that we don't have to travel. I travel a lot and I always think about that. It's like, I need to just stay in one spot and deal with my stuff and also know that it can be done from anywhere at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about that a lot. Like I obviously am visiting LA right now, and this week that I've been here, I've packed so full of like, since I'm here, I'm going to see all the people I can see and I'm going to go to do all the meetings, and I've had no alone time, which is nice. It's good to distract yourself from your own shit. You know?
Totally.
But ultimately it's like tomorrow when I get on the plane, it's all going to bubble up again. And it's like, you're running from yourself, And I think I'm someone who, and I've obviously you do a lot too. Someone who tends to overschedule. And I find myself that I'm a time optimist. So like, I'm like, okay, if I have something at 10, that means I can leave at 9 and I can get all this done before. And it's like, really, I could maybe get the one thing done.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be a time pessimist, failing. But I had my friend Abby told me that would be a good thing for me. And
I love Abby. Yeah. I mean, I don't know her, but I love the verbiage. I love all of it.
I know. I feel like it's something that I think as women, and not everyone is like this. I know people who are good at slowing. Our mutual friend Carolina, I feel like she's good at, I think having kids probably, was that helpful for you for slowing?
Yeah.
It forces you,
I mean,
right?
I literally haven't worked out in like 9 months or I guess like he's 10 months now. So maybe a year. I haven't worked out in a year. And like before, my husband would be terrified. Even if we were on a trip and I didn't get in a run, he'd be like, no, Nikki needs to go on her run or else like we don't want to hang out with her.
Right.
Like I was so type A with my workouts. And it feels so good to not be like that. Obviously, I love moving and I'll like go on walks and stuff, but
totally.
Having kids definitely helps that because you can't control anything.
Yeah.
And like I'm such a control freak.
Same. I feel like we're really very similar. We have similar neuroses.
Yeah, like we met at the fullest launch of one of our issues.
New York,
a while ago, and it was through Jordan.
That was like almost 3 years ago.
Yeah, it was at the panel that like, oh my God, everything that could go wrong at that panel had gone wrong that day. But then you had come because I was interviewing Jordan.
That went right.
Yeah, and then we met, and then you came to the launch, and then you met Carolina or. I don't know. There was something that happened. Like Kimberly came and gave a talk, and through the questions that you asked, I just knew that we were very similar, and that I don't know. It wasn't even the one thing you asked. The way that you asked it, I was like, oh, I totally get this girl. And
that's how I felt about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
you remind me. I was going to tell you about this before you started recording, but you remind me of someone I went to high school with in the most cozy way of like, when someone reminds you of someone else, you're like, I feel closer to you than I even am.
Yeah,
like we haven't spent that much time together, but I'm like, oh, we could like travel together.
Yeah,
like
for
and
sure.
Be chill.
I know. I want to hear more about your breakup though, that you were just telling me about, because was it the same? So was this boyfriend that supported you into like starting to blog and doing all that?
No,
the
different
same?
boyfriend.
Okay.
So that was my college boyfriend, and we broke up, and that was nothing. Oh my God, I shouldn't say that.
Nothing.
Compared to this, it was nothing. I was also much younger, you know, I'm now like close to 30, and back then I was, you know, essentially a child. Do you feel like that looking back at my early 20s? That's how I feel. And that person was so wonderful and so supportive. And this last relationship, this is like super recent and vulnerable and raw. And I've never experienced heartbreak like this. And I had to talk about it on the podcast. Actually, this has to do with you in a funny way.
What?
So as I was going through this, like as I was this was unfolding, I don't know if you remember this, but you and the team reached out to me to write something about love for Valentine's Day.
Oh my gosh.
And interview Lacey about love.
That's so
I was
funny.
like, of course, yeah. But literally at the same time, my actual relationship is breaking up. It was the hardest thing ever that I've ever, I mean, still is. Like, I'm really like, this is the like, I've never really felt heartbreak before and been this low. And I feel like there's a richness. I'm someone who has depression, and I'm someone who hasn't really talked about that in my work, but so I wrote that article, and then I eventually was like, I'm going to have to talk about this on the podcast. I'm just going to have to rip the Band-Aid off, because essentially, like, you know, he would like be in the intros with me, and I would like mention my boyfriend. I was just like, it's just going to be, and also these podcasts are and I'm sure you feel the same way. They're such a mirror into what I'm experiencing at that moment, what I'm experiencing at that moment. And so, you know, 7 years ago, I was asking questions like, you know, how many chia seeds do you put in that smoothie? And like so controlling. And now I'm like, I couldn't give a shit about that. But I want to know, like, how did you move through heartbreak, and how are you feeling being a person, and what's your relationship advice, and, you know, or whatever. I've grown up on the internet essentially over these. We've done nearly 300 of them. And so
300 podcasts. How often does it come out?
Weekly, but I've done it for like 7 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So anyway, you know, and I'm starting to forget people I've talked to, because it's just so many.
Yeah.
Like when I was in Paris, actually, somebody was reading a book, and I was like, what is that? And I was like, oh, I interviewed her. And I like just little things of like, I'm starting to forget. But anyway, what I'll say about this heartbreak is that I'm still super in it, and navigating, talking about my depression and talking about this has been useful, because it feels like this isn't a feeling that feels so isolating and so lonely, but also it's something that everyone's felt.
I know.
And it's what people make art about and write songs about, and writing about it and making art about it feels cathartic, but it also feels close. So yeah, I don't know. It's something, I know there's richness to it, as dark and bleak as it can be.
Do you communicate with your ex?
It's like a whole long story.
There's a long, okay, yeah.
I'll tell you, but not really. No, it's like a really, I've been saying about it, it's very emotionally bloody.
Oh my gosh. But before, you never spoke about your depression, or you never spoke up about it?
Not really.
And how is it now, mentioning it or talking about it? Do people reach out?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's something that when you have a tendency towards melancholy, and ever since I was a kid, I had this, it's my brain, you know, and I talked for years, and I've written essays about this, and I wrote a particular essay a couple years ago several years ago, before my book came out. I think it was 2015 for Refinery 29, about my eating disorder, and something called, I didn't even know this was the thing, but when this essay came out, the Daily Mail wrote about it, and Teen Vogue wrote about it, and the headline was Anorexia Nostalgia. And I didn't even realize that was a thing, but basically it's about when you have recovered from an eating disorder, it's looking back at old pictures of yourself, or remembering how controlling you were, and feeling like, oh man, I wish I could be there now, even though you know how unhappy you are, but it's your mind. Because what I believe about eating disorders is that, and the reason I brought this up into depression, it's like, for me, it was an outward expression of an inward struggle. You know, it was what I experienced in my mind, and I've experienced since I was a kid. Nobody can really see unless I talk about. And you know me, and you've met me, and from the internet, you know, I'm this like sparkly, shiny person all the time. And so my eating disorder and that's how I grew up with people like that. That's just like, you know, I'm Midwestern. It's like you work really hard, you put on a good face, and you show up no matter what. And I can do that, but I feel like I can almost do that to a fault. And so I feel like maybe subconsciously, this is something I'm just like unpacking recently, is like I feel like my eating disorder was this outward showcase of cry for help. And anyway, what I believe about eating disorders is that they're active or inactive, like being an alcoholic. And I think when circumstances come up that are challenging, like a breakup, like a shift in a job, like a move, and for me, I'm having them all at once.
Yeah.
It's really destabilizing, and it brings up different things. And so, you know, my depression is kind of this gentle hum, but it was really activated by so much change in my life at once. And I think ultimately that's what led to the topic of the column I've been writing for you guys, because I was writing an essay for you every single month, and it was about something tender, a story that was, this is, you know, kind of what my work, the new phase that I was telling you about that it's launching into, is about this, because people were resonating with the topics that I was writing with you guys. And essentially we realized that there was like a theme, and it's transitions, and it's change, and it's, you know, our 20s are messy, and they're intense, and there's highs and lows.
And people don't really talk about it. I feel like, I mean, just now more and more people, but it's like, you go to school, and you go to school up until a certain time. I mean, some people extend it, but most people, maybe for the majority of the world, it's not even high school, but like, okay, for our generation or where we live, it's college, right?
Yeah.
You get your undergrad, and then you don't know what to do with yourself because you never really thought past that.
Right.
And then like for me, I was like, I want to be in wellness, but what is that? I studied business. I mean, I have the most general education. How do I do this? And I kind of created my path, but I was going to school in Oregon. So my transition was, my husband and I have been together since we were in high school, but we grew up here in Southern California, moved to Oregon. And when I decided to come back, I went there because my parents were getting a divorce. So it was a transition that was really difficult for me. And I was able to like just leave.
Yep.
And then when I came home, that was when I was like, wait, I thought all my problems were gone. Like I had an eating disorder in high school. I thought I didn't have one anymore, but really I came home and all of those things came back, and it's exactly like what you just said.
Wherever you go, there you are.
Exactly. And it's because of the point in my life where I was in this transition. I wasn't happy. Things started coming back up. I mean, I also was having a lot of health issues, but it was because of my emotional state. And like my eating disorder somewhat came back, and I was like, what? I'm a yoga instructor. I'm a vegan. Like I don't have an eating disorder. I can't, you know, I had bulimia, and why is this coming up? And it wasn't until I really like just became vulnerable and found a doctor to really help me. And it wasn't a doctor helping me with my eating disorder. It was a doctor helping me with my emotional issues, with my childhood, and with so many things that I was able to overcome those things. But this topic of transitions is so important. And for me, it was transition in my 20s, and that was so difficult. I mean, I'm still in my 20s, but I'm 29 like next week. But
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Happy birthday to you.
Thanks.
I'm sure when's your, you just had it.
Yeah.
April
30th.
Yeah. But I think it's so important to discuss and get into and share our problems, because I mean, if you're going to be a person on the internet, just, you know, share a lot of it. And I mean, you don't have to, but I think once there's something to be said about sharing something when you're going through it. And I don't know, or sharing it when you're out of it. I think sometimes when you've processed something, maybe it's nicer, but sometimes maybe when it's like you're in it and you're dealing with it, and other people can relate to that too, and not feel as alone. And I don't know.
I don't know the protocol of how to be a person, honestly, and when to share. And I think there's a level of like, you don't want to talk about something from a really messy place, because I think that you'll say
Trigger
things that,
or...
and I just think that doesn't do anyone any favors. But I also, what I love about the Fullest and what I love about the writing that I do is I think we both have been in a similar situation with wellness and particularly self-help that, I read Healing My Eating Disorder originally. I read every diet book you could read. I did all the things. And what I realized is that ultimately all of those protocols are what worked for that person, and we're all really different. And I believe that stress is worse than anything that you could put in your mouth. So to just we have so few sensory pleasures in this world. So to deny ourselves any of them because of unless you're getting like extremely sick, because of a test or because of this person said it or because it worked for that person, that's great. But I think ultimately we're so different that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I think with self-help and emotional help and mental health, it's the same thing. We've both read every self-help book, every spiritual book under the sun, and I love them as much as the next guy, but I'm sick of, I even wrote a self-help book, but even that, it's like a recipe book to get into the inside of your mind. They're all journaling exercises because, first of all, I wrote that book when I was 25 years old. I hadn't lived enough life to write a memoir, much less a prescriptive memoir or a self-help book, because I feel like the wisest people I know, and I know you're very close with your grandparents, they really impacted you, are the older generation is really what we should be learning from.
Yeah.
Our ancestors with food, with life, with everything. Yeah. And so I think there are so many self-help people and coaches and this and that. And I think that that's great, but I don't want to be another one of them. And that's what Let It Out is about, letting out. We're launching this new thing all around soft stories. So essentially what the stories I write for the Fullest are me not saying that I'm the guru, I've made it to the other side, because I'm not, and I never will be. I don't think any of us will be. And I think the more we grow, the older we get, I think I'll be the most fulfilled and know myself the most right before I die, because that's why we're here as people, is to get to know ourselves and then share what we learn. And hopefully that helps other people, but it might just be entertaining or make people feel less alone. And that's essentially what I want all of my work to do, through what I do with you guys, through what I do on my own, is to make people feel less alone, because I've been helped by stories of other people.
Mm-hmm. And so with the transition and just pivot in general, like, how are you helping people do that?
Well, wouldn't it be great if we learned from success and easy things in life?
Yeah.
But like, I think the way the world is wired is that we learn from challenging things, failure, having our feelings hurt, someone not texting us back, heartbreak, rejection. Like, that's where we learn. That's where the richness is. And I don't have you ever learned from something going really well? You're just like, okay, cool.
You learn more basic. Yeah, I agree. You learn more through the tough stuff. And I think it's sad, because I think you should be able to learn through the good stuff too.
I know. I just don't think we're wired that way. I think the good stuff's great and it keeps us going and it gives us momentum. But I think growth as humans comes from messy things. It comes from change. And that's what Pivot, this column we're working on together, it's about all of us have gone, moving is messy. Yeah. Money and navigating that is messy. And these are the themes I'm talking about, breakups and friendship and all of these things moving, which we talked about,
facing yourself in general.
Yeah, we're really, I'll speak for myself. I'm really bad at being uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And we want to go to the easy thing. We want to go to the comfortable thing. It's like what we were talking about before with starting a podcast, or oh, there's a lot to do with that. I'm just not going to do it because it's uncomfortable, and change it, learning a new skill. It's uncomfortable to not know how to do it and have to teach yourself. And I think that's where the richness comes. That's where the growth comes. And man, it's really hard to be a person. So I need really hard. And I'm someone who clearly needs to talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
And so that's how writing is useful for me. It always has been.
And you're such an incredible writer that it'd be a shame if you didn't do that.
That's so nice. Thank you. And thank you for giving me a platform to share my work. And
thank you.
I love it. We couldn't be more aligned with what we're trying to do in the world. So to be able to work with you in that way, and it's cool to collaborate with people that I love.
It really is. And I'm super excited for other things that we've been talking about potentially collaborating on.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the new Let It Out. And just before we finish up, I want to hear more about that.
Let It Out 2.0. I'm so excited. I think you're actually really going to like it.
I know I will.
So I was telling Nikki while she was making my saffron latte, which is so good.
Which is a really good mood lifter, by the way.
Ooh, it's working.
It really helps with like postpartum too. So it helps with other things. Yeah.
I was great. Then I really need it. I had a moment of like, oh shoot, is this bad that I'm saying we're not drinking matcha? We're actually drinking it. We like matcha too. Anyway, so the Let It Out 2.0, we'll call it, I have been working on for over a year, and it's an extension of the work that I normally do with my podcast, but I wanted to tell stories in different ways. So I want more writing and voices of other people, because I'm one white, straight woman living in New York that's 29 years old, and I want to hear from other people, and I want to hear from especially younger people. I have this team of interns who are younger than me and teach me so much. And also I want to hear from older people because they teach me so much. One of my best friends is in her 50s, and she's like this second mom, wonderful human being who was an herbalist before it was cool, and an art teacher, and just I feel like there's so much wisdom from people of different generations. And so I want to I want to let that out. And so Let It Out is all about letting out what I was telling you, soft stories. So these are these tender, vulnerable, real stories that make people feel less alone when told, require presence and vulnerability when told, because it's scary. It's scary for you to sit here and tell me something that you were embarrassed about or had shame about. But when you do, and I say, me too, or I relate, that bonds us, that binds us, that like we'll remember that forever. And so I'm sure you've had this experience, and I've definitely had this experience where someone's said something vulnerable and I've felt seen and I've related, and same on the other end of that. So I want to essentially, with this new platform, tell those stories in the form of live events and magazine of sorts and online, and eventually have some sort of tactile component to it and bringing people together. I'm just going to let it grow with my work. That's what it's been since I started. And I think what's weird about doing something on the internet, and I'd love to talk to you about this more, it's such a malleable, interesting place where what works, you constantly have to pivot.
Always. Always finding, and it keeps you on your toes, and it keeps you going. And I always sit and think, like, if I didn't have the fullest, if I wasn't doing this, what would I be doing? Because I love it so much. I like thrive off of it. And even navigating motherhood while doing it, it's like a whole nother level that I never thought. I'm like, I don't think I can have another kid. We want to, but I'm just like, I don't know how it'll fit, but it'll fit.
It always does. It's like that quote of like, the amount of work stretches to the time that you have.
And just how love grows. I think like every day my love grows for my family and the people that I work with. Like, it's just, I think your work does too, if you love it. You know, what word am I thinking of? Like, I'm capable of more. I don't know. There was a word for it, but that's the best way of putting it.
Maybe it's this. Our mutual friend, who's like my best friend in New York, Carolina, her word of the year this year is potential.
Yes.
And our birthdays are a week apart.
Aww.
And I was having a really tough day on my birthday, which ironically, I wrote an article for The Fullest about birthdays.
Yeah.
But she said, you got to think about potential this year.
I love her.
And I think that's kind of the word you're looking for.
Yeah.
Of like, when you do something that's unknown, it's uncomfortable, but you lean into thinking about what would happen if it did go well. Because I think as someone who has anxiety and depression, but especially anxiety is essentially obsessing about what could go wrong.
Yeah.
It's worry, and in a very simple form. So if you focus on potential, that's like the opposite of anxiety.
I love that. I think that's so neat. That was so needed for me at this moment. Like, before we sat down to talk today, before you walked in through the door, I was going through so much this morning, just personally with like family stuff and just trying to figure out and navigate like my familial relationships. And yeah, I was going back and forth on an email thread. And David was like, just take a minute though. And it's true, like what you're saying, there's still potential there. And instead of like totally engaging with it, maybe taking a moment and pivoting from my stance on it and like seeing another perspective even. I mean, the little pivots like that we take throughout our day and the overall pivots that we take in a lifetime. I mean, they're like you were saying, you're constantly pivoting and tuning into that and seeing and refining that. That's like, where we learned from.
Yeah. And that like for the fullest, I'm writing about pivoting and I'm writing about this in the perspective of our 20s because that's the only reference point I have, which is that this is a challenging decade and I'm learning a lot. But hopefully I'll probably be writing about this about the 70s. I'll be like, remember Nikki? We'll like have our canes and I'll be here and like, so I've got this new column she's read. Like, I guarantee you we learn in every decade. This is just the first one.
I know.
And so I kind of feel like, when you're a teenager, you're kind of a cartoon character of yourself because you feel everything for the first time, also hormones. And I think your 20s are just a second adolescence that, you're not told as an adolescent. You're told you have to be an adult. So it's even more complicated. And I'm sure I'll still be writing something about pivoting in my 30s and 40s and hopefully till I die,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's so true.
And maybe it'll get easier and maybe I won't want to write it. Hopefully there'll be less content to write about.
I think there's always going to be content. Eric's grandma is, she's 88 or 89 years old and she's with it. And so we have all these amazing conversations and she is just like, I just go to a lot of funerals and she keeps herself busy. But then when she says those things, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to need like a group of friends that I can talk to forever about these things. Cause my grandma, she just passed away recently, but she gave herself to her family 100%. Everything was work and family, and she didn't have any friends. And so I think it's important, and we're always going to learn, and we learn from our elders, like you were saying, and also we'll learn from our friends at that age, and we're always the landscape is always changing.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because with our amazing editor, Lindsay, and you, I sent in all of the pitches that I'm doing for this column, and I don't even know if you remember this, but a big theme of 4 of them is about friendship as an adult and navigating that. And the other one is there's one pitch is that I'm writing about losing grandparents because it's a thing that is likely to happen in your 20s. And that relationship is, really interesting and impactful. And it's very different from parents. And,
so different.
I also have divorced parents and it's complicated. And so I think navigating that wisdom that comes with friendship and family and work, it's complicated, and you're learning how to be the person you're going to be for the rest of your life in your 20s and 30s.
Wow, so amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and coming all the way. It was a big, big ride for you. So I really, really appreciate you just taking the time. I know you're super busy and it was so wonderful to just meet in person. And I'm looking forward to being on your podcast when I come to New York.
It's going to be great
this fall. And it'll be really fun. But thank you for joining us and for trying this Afro latte on Morning Matcha.
Could we do an actual cheers? Could we do an actual podcast just on how great this is?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'll tell you all the benefits in the next podcast.
Oh, great. Okay, yeah. It's so good. I'm in. If it helps with depression, I mean.
I know. It's crazy. Thank you.